All right, everybody. Welcome to the Reveal Reporting Network's info session. We are here with Byard Duncan. Byard, welcome. So we're just gonna get started. I'm gonna read a little bit of his bio and get some information about him, and then he's gonna start on a presentation. So Byard Duncan is a reporter and producer for engagement and collaborations for Reveal. He manages Reveal's reporting networks, which provide more than 1,000 local journalists across the US with resources, training to continue Reveal's investigations in their communities. He also helps lead audience engagement initiatives around Reveal's stories and assists local reporters in elevating their work to national platforms. In addition to Reveal, Duncan's work has appeared in GQ, Esquire, the California Sunday Magazine, and Columbia Journalism Review, among many other outlets. He was part of Reveal's Behind the Smiles project team, which was named the Pulitzer Prize finalist in 2019. He is a recipient of 2 Edward R. Murrow Awards, a National Headliner Award, an Al Narath Innovation in Investigative Journalism Award, and 2 first place awards for feature storytelling in the Society of Professional Journalists and Best of the West. So that's a fantastic bio, Byard. Can you tell us a little bit about what you do at Reveal and how you got involved with this type of investigative reporting?
Definitely. Thank you so much for the introduction. And it's so nice to see everyone, Darius, Will, Joshua, and Matthew. I'm glad we have a little bit of an intimate meeting. I wonder if before I get started on my presentation, I could throw it around to you guys in just a minute to maybe each of you could take a minute to tell me a little bit about yourselves and the sort of reporting you do. I got into this form of reporting, after graduating from college. I moved to California from Ithaca, New York. I went to Ithaca College and started freelancing, doing like arts writing and reporting, but always had investigative ambitions. And so I was hired by Reveal in 2015, and I'll kind of like go through how we began to set up this collaborative, the Reveal Reporting Networks that I'm going to be talking about in my presentation. But perhaps the big turning point for me in sort of learning that I wanted to go into investigative reporting and journalism in the public interest was my senior thesis project in college. That was a close look at a native land rights case in New York State that was basically, long story short, had like very profoundly unjust and sort of racist legal underpinnings that the community that was fighting for their land really had no legal recourse to explore. And so sort of looking at as a young man, looking at the unfairness, the sort of entrenched unfairness in that, and how that unfairness was enshrined into law to sort of keep a community out of something that rightfully belonged to them. That was a big turning point for me. And since joining Reveal, I've reported on a number of issues. I cover mostly technology and democracy for Reveal. And my specialization is in an approach to reporting called engaged reporting, which is to use various tools and approaches to not only get story ideas and story tips from our audience, but also to find ways to sort of put a story back in front of the proper audiences, the ones for whom it would matter most to read or to listen to, and then create a cycle, like a virtuous cycle of people interacting with our stories and then sort of providing more information and more context to lead, sort of guide further reporting. Most recently, that approach has sort of served us well for reporting on the census. My colleague, David Rodriguez, and I did a number of stories over the fall that were based upon a public call out, like a public survey we sent out and targeted to former census workers. And we had about almost 200 of them respond with different issues, different gripes that they had about how the census was going on the ground. And from that sort of surge of responses we got, we were able to kind of like narrow in on some actual endemic issues that were going on with the with the implementation of the census and bring those findings to the Census Bureau. And we turned out 3 investigations based on that sort of big pot of census workers who were telling us their stories. So that's one example of how that approach works. Another big part of my job, in addition to just reporting through, through an engaged lens, is the creation, maintenance, and management, and of course recruitment for our Reveal reporting networks, which is what I'm going to be talking about primarily here today. But if we do have time, Amber, I would love to just get a quick introduction from all the folks who are here. It'd be great to learn a little bit about you. I see in order Darius, Will, Josh, and Matthew. So maybe Darius, we could start with you. Tell me a little bit about yourself.
All right, I'm Darius Rantzis. I'm from the New York City area. I'm a television and radio reporter on air. Work for 1010 Wins News Radio and all news all the time, 24-hour station, and a 24-hour local cable news station. News 12 networks in different regions. We have different regions, so I just pop around everywhere else. That's my brief introduction, but I could get in deeper and I could talk for hours talking about myself. So if you have any questions, just ask me, but that just gives you an idea of what I do professionally.
Okay, I think that was a good template for everyone else too. That's okay. The hyper brief one.
So this is a big week for me. So I graduated my MFA in creative writing from American University this week. I finished up an internship. Thank you. Internship with the Alexandria Times. So I'm based in Washington, DC, but I work for the Alexandria Times. And then next month, I'm going to be starting my first full-time job as an accountability reporter for Street Sense Media, which is like the DC street paper, and the DC Line, which is also another local news site as like a Pointer Fellow. And so that's my brief introduction.
Impressive. Congratulations. Did you say where you just finished your MFA? What school?
American University.
American. Congratulations. That's awesome.
Thank you.
Joshua.
There we go. Hi, I'm Josh. I'm from Michigan, and I'm just starting my journalism career. I do a lot of self-publishing around my hometown and around the state on the west side, and did a lot of photo galleries during the election and summer protests in Washington this past year.
Awesome. Nice to meet you.
Hi, I'm Matt, and I'm from Boston, if you can't already tell by my accent. I graduated from the Columbia School of Journalism last year, and then was promptly
Congratulations.
Thank you so much. And I was promptly put on active duty orders. I'm still a member of the Guard, so I've been doing that since that time. So I'm going to be getting off orders soon, and I'm looking to get involved in investigative reporting. Thanks.
Member of the GAD. You're taking me back home. I'm a Rhode Islander myself, so the accents are not too dissimilar. It's great to hear your voice.
My unit is at Quonset.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Yeah. And
Beautiful.
I'm working in Cranston right now, believe it or not. So.
Okay, Cranston. Yeah, that's fantastic. It's going to get, are you going to be there for the summer, or you got to ship out sooner?
Well, there's some debate on how that's going to work, depending on how the vaccinations go. But my orders are till August at least, but there's some debate how long it'll go. But it's been a gratifying experience, but I'm ready to tackle other challenges.
Well, don't hurry out before summer lands. Give yourself that. That's the only truly great time in Rhode Island. All right. Well, it's so nice to meet all of you, and maybe Amber could get the slides teed up. And the way that I do this generally is, the presentation is just about a half hour long. I'll try to race through it so that there's plenty of time for questions and discussion at the end. But yeah, and I could even potentially do it a little quicker because we've already done some introductions. I'm gonna minimize my Zoom so I can look at my notes while I'm doing this. You guys can all still hear me, right? Okay. All right. Well, thanks again, not only for coming, but for introducing yourselves and taking a little time to hear about our reporting networks. My name is, oops, could we jump back for just a moment, Amber?
Nope.
I'll let you know. I'll just say next slide when it's time to. So as Amber mentioned, I'm Byard Duncan, Reveal's engagement reporter. I'm here to introduce you to our reporting networks. They're completely free. They're a resource that we hope is really useful for journalists at the local level early in their careers. And I'll go into a lot of detail about how they work and all that stuff. But to begin with, I'll just let you know that we started building these out in the summer of 2018. And currently there are 8 of them, 8 different networks, 4 of which are active, 4 of which are kind of archived because the data or the resources are no longer really newsworthy, but nevertheless, they're there for you to check out. As we go along, the way I like to do this is to just have people drop their questions in the chat. That way you can just get it out as soon as it dawns on you. You don't have to hold it anywhere. And then at the end of the session, I'll just go through the questions chronologically. And then with a group this small, again, I'm really excited because I think we can just have sort of a, people aren't worried about talking over each other or anything like that. So if you want to just blurt out your questions after I finished presenting, I'm very happy to answer them and just do what I can to help you along. Next slide, please. So a bit about Reveal. We were founded in 1977. We're America's oldest nonprofit investigative newsroom. Our flagship product is a weekly public radio show and podcast that's on about 600 radio stations each week through the Public Radio Exchange. That is our host in the corner, Al Letson. That's not a photo. That's a creative interpretation. And even though we're primarily a radio show and podcast, we also operate at revealnews.org, where there are long form text investigations, video projects, as well as our sort of like marquee audio product. Next slide, please. So I'm here to talk about the networks. And you may be wondering, like, what exactly are the networks? Well, we basically started piloting this approach back in 2018 with a problem that I found to be endemic to investigative reporting, which is that there's just too much damn stuff. At the time, 2 of our reporters, a woman named Amy Julia Harris and another named Shoshana Walter, had been investigating exploitative work-based rehabs, drug and alcohol rehabs, for more than a year. These were places that were putting residents to work for free in exchange for treatment. And each time they released a new story, they got this flood of tips from people across the country, basically saying, you reported on that place, but I know of a place that's even worse and you should check it out. And for a while, they were kind of playing whack-a-mole from facility to facility, reporting on one, exposing all of its problems, hearing about another, moving on to that. But after more than a year of doing this, they came to me and basically said, look, we have a problem. We have to figure out a way to share what people are telling us with a broader community of reporters. Otherwise, we could theoretically just spend the rest of our lives playing whack-a-mole, like exposing one rehab after the next. But at the same time, exposing these rehabs as being exploitative and as, potentially violating labor laws, it's a worthwhile cause. So they felt torn. So we didn't have a plan as to how we would do that. We just had a problem we knew we needed to solve. And so the proposal I came back to them with was basically like, oh, well, we should just find a way to organize all these tips together, do a little bit of vetting of them, and then share them out with a broad network of reporters. And they said, that sounds like a great idea. Who are the reporters you're thinking of? And I said, I don't know. Why don't we go get some? Thus, next slide, please. Our rehab reporting network was born in July of 2018. And the infrastructure was pretty simple. We had collected these tips regarding about 100 rehabs. We'd done it through a variety of different media, direct emails to our reporters. We had embedded online forms into some of our stories that were asking people, have you had an experience like this? Tell us about it. We had done social call outs on our Twitter and Facebook channels, things like that. Reporters who were interested, once we started, this was just a web page we launched. Once we started touting it on social media and in our newsletters, we offered a Google form that they could sign up with. And basically they were off to the races. They had access to all these different tips from all these different facilities across the country. And within a couple of weeks, nearly 300 reporters had signed up. They also got access to a PDF how-to guide about how to begin investigating rehabs in your area. And that was written by the 2 reporters who were behind the project. Next slide, please. So before long, we got a little flurry of local stories that came out of this. Here are a couple examples. On the left, you have a piece from State Impact Oklahoma and The Frontier, which is investigative newsroom, nonprofit investigative newsroom in Oklahoma. Reporters there looked into a facility called First Step, which was taking clients' disability pay and actually employing them to work for Oklahoma City, cutting grass and like picking up litter. Another one over to the right, this is WFAE in North Carolina. Their reporter Alexandra Olgin found that one rehab was actually putting people struggling with addiction to work for free, doing things like stacking liquor in a liquor warehouse. She talked to labor experts for that story, and they said they'd never heard of anything like it, and it was likely illegal. Another one in Seattle, a reporter named Melissa Hellman found a long history of abuse at a really prominent rehab facility there. This year, we actually tried out something new. I did a partnership with UNC Chapel Hill, the University of North Carolina, with a sort of high-level investigative reporting class to share some of these tips and to do a little bit more in-depth guidance with them around how to report out these stories as part of an investigative reporting class. And so some of those stories will be landing pretty soon. So that was the first network. Next slide, please. The second one occurred just months later. We had seen some success with that first rehab reporting network, and we were like, oh, this is, that was kind of a cool idea. And before long, we realized, hey, we have another investigative story coming up that we're about to release that has a huge mountain of resources that accompany it. Maybe we should try to think of a way to share those out as well. So our Case Cleared reporting network grew out of an investigation that we called Case Cleared. We found dozens of law enforcement agencies across the US were basically making it appear as though they had solved a significant share of their rape cases, when in fact they'd just closed them through a process called exceptional clearance. And exceptional clearance was basically the police and the prosecutors got together, took a look at the facts of a case, the accusations, the allegations, and agreed, this looks hard, let's not do it, essentially. And they took the case off the books, despite the fact that the victim, still insisted that he or she had endured a sexual assault or a rape. In the public's eyes, of course, when the public hears about this and a police department is talking about the number of cases that they've cleared, the public really doesn't know the difference. So we had this huge data set spanning across, dozens of different metro areas, showing that the rate of cases that were cleared as opposed to solved was incredibly high in a lot of cities. Now, we focused in on Austin, Texas, where the issue was the worst, but that doesn't say that, or that doesn't mean that in a place like Oakland, California, actually, where I live, or other places like Louisville, Kentucky, where the issue was also severe, it doesn't mean that those problems are any less important. So that was sort of the issue we were trying to solve there. How do we put these data sets into the hands of local reporters who are in these places, in the place where it's the second worst or the third worst, to be able to tell impactful stories in their communities? And that's just what we did. And at this point, a pattern was beginning to emerge too. It was like, okay, this is the second investigation we've done this for. Maybe this is an approach that we should actually kind of be paying closer attention to. Maybe this presents an opportunity for us to do this more and more. Next slide, please. So just as with the Rehab Reporting Network, there was a flurry of localizations that came out of the resources we shared with reporters on this one. In Baltimore, the Baltimore Sun picked up the story pretty quickly. Over to the right, you see Prosecution Declined. That was from Kentucky Center for Investigative Reporting. That ultimately went on to win an IRE award, an award from the Investigative Reporters and Editors Association. Below that is a feature in the East Bay Express, which is here in Oakland, California. And to the left of that is an op-ed in the Seattle Times. These are all stories that grew from the resources, the data set that we offered out to the different local reporters. Next slide, please. the trend continued. Basically, a few months after that, we teamed up with Investigate West to do an hour-long episode on high school concussions. And we found that even though there are state laws dictating how concussions must be treated, there's actually very little clarity on individual school districts' policies. So what we did to help alleviate that information gap was we built a very simple plug and play public records request, just a customizable PDF that anybody who wanted could text a number after listening to our podcast, and they could get it delivered to their phone, this PDF. From there, they could customize their name, their school district's names, and like their superintendent's name. And we had a list of pre-written questions that they could just send into their school district and then get responses about the concussion policies. The goal here was not necessarily tailored specifically to journalists. It was more broad. It was more to put the power of reporting into the hands of a community that could be really affected by this issue. But nevertheless, of around 200 people that ended up requesting this form, roughly 40% were journalists. So as you see on the next slide, there were another flurry of local stories based on this resource that we gave, not just to journalists, but to members of the public. On the left is a piece from the Santa Fe Reporter. And in New Mexico, they passed a law aimed at requiring school districts to develop head injury protocols for student athletes. But when the Santa Fe Reporter surveyed all 89 New Mexico school districts, of the 49 that responded, only 5 had actually developed their own head injury guidelines for high schoolers. So the districts were not actually abiding by the law by and large. Then over on the right, that's from KUNC in Colorado. KUNC found that students were pulled out of play for head injuries more than 6,000 times over the course of the previous 5 years. But the true number actually of kids pulled out of play with suspected concussions was likely much higher. And that's because the 6,000 incidents that this reporter was able to uncover, those came from just 6 of the state's 178 school districts. So again, 6,000 head injury incidents over the span of 5 years, but from just 6 of 178 school districts. So this just provided a little snapshot into just how endemic head injuries in high school athletics were in Colorado. And again, both of these stories were achieved using that public records form that we provided to the reporters. On the next slide, you'll see a more recent network we launched. This actually had 2 iterations. This has to do with Amazon and worker injuries at Amazon. The first iteration accompanied a November 2019 investigation we did into worker injuries at Amazon fulfillment centers across the US. There are 110 or so fulfillment centers at the time. We were able to get injury records for 23 of them through just on-the-ground reporting, through basically finding former employees who had a legal right to get the full injury records and then asking them to go get them for us and share them with us. So we had a snapshot at first, and we found that the rate of serious injuries for those facilities, those 23, was more than double the national average for the warehousing industry. So that was bad. We were able to share out to local reporters who had joined the network all 23 sets of data so that they could localize the story in their communities. I should also mention that at this point, each time we launched one of these separate web pages, it garnered more interest. And so we were getting more and more signups from local reporters, I think. But by the time we launched this one, the Behind the Smiles Network, we probably had close to 700 reporters in the networks. Then a year later, in September 2020, our lead reporter on the Amazon project, Will Evans, got records for all the company's warehouses. So more than 110, because there had been more built subsequently since the first investigation. And not just injury records for 1 year, but injury records stretching across a span of 4 years. So all of a sudden, the information that we had on offer for local reporters, expanded exponentially. You know, if you are in a state or a city that has an Amazon warehouse in it, you could just simply go to our Data Interactive, see within the span of 1 minute if your warehouse was performing like better, worse, or significantly worse than the national standard for the warehousing industry, which is set by the Bureau of the Department of Labor, excuse me. And if you found that your nearest Amazon warehouse had an injury rate or a serious injury rate 3 times the national standard, there's your story. Just go talk to people after that, because you already basically have the central thrust in the nut graph of your story. So like before, next slide, please. Local stories. I'll kind of race past this part because I feel like I'm beating a dead horse by now, but Fresno B, Cleveland Scene, KUER in Salt Lake City, and the Toronto Star, in this case, all produced stories. There were actually more than a dozen, but these are some of my favorites that came out of this network. Next slide, please. So here's where we get pretty current. This is our PPP reporting network, and this actually just launched Monday. We basically, our data team over the course of the past year conducted an analysis of more than 5 million PPP loans. And they found widespread racial disparities in how the loans were distributed. We found that in the vast majority of metro areas with a population of 1 million people or more, the rate of lending to majority white areas was higher than the rates for any majority Latinx, Black, or Asian areas. And in many metro areas, such as Los Angeles, which is what this photo is of, the disparities were extreme. But again, we're getting back to the same issue that we were confronted from the very beginning, which is that we're telling the story of this huge endemic issue because we're the national newsroom. We're focusing in and looking at characters and places in Los Angeles, and using Los Angeles as a case study to expand outward and kind of mention offhand all the different places this is happening. But we have an enormous data set that is available to anyone. And again, this is a vast majority, as I said before, this is a vast majority of metro areas with a population of 1 million people or more. So we recognized ahead of time the strong potential for network reporters to take this data and to localize it. And so we tried a few things differently this time around. Firstly, we gave local reporters pre-publication access to the data. We actually shared the data with them 2 weeks ahead of schedule, or ahead of publication, so that they could have completed stories that landed on Monday. And so far, a handful of them have. We also partnered with an organization based at Stanford University called Big Local News, who provides a really nicely built data repository, because previously at Reveal, we have access to this big network of people, but we had to kind of build the tools to share the data and resources out each time we built one of these networks, and that was kind of hard and time consuming. Big Local News basically already has a tool and they're willing to share it. And finally, we took a more hands-on approach with the reporters who were progressing along in their reporting this time around. We had office hours. I had a form that people could submit their questions to as they were progressing through their reporting, and we would then answer them to the best of our ability, just to really ensure that we were helping bring people across the finish line. So on the next slide, you'll see that there have already been there have been 5 local stories from this network. I'm anticipating more. I set a personal goal for 20 local stories. It's only been live 2 days. So we shall see as more roll in. On the left, you'll see one from Michigan Radio. On the right is from KPBS in San Diego. So next slide, please. A quick recap of all the stuff I just raced through. We've launched 8 of these networks since 2018. The active ones now are the PPP Reporting Network, the Rehab Reporting Network, the School Concussions one, and Behind the Smiles. And the others that have that we sort of sunsetted or archived because their data is no longer super applicable is the Case Cleared one about rape clearance. I'm sorry, we have not sunset the School Concussions one. I need to fix that. That's an evergreen. To Protect and Slur was a investigation into law enforcement officers that were members of hate groups on Facebook. And then the U Visas network as well was investigated barriers to people who were seeking U visas in different law enforcement agencies across the country. But again, I think that data is a little outdated. So we have 4 active networks right now. On the next slide, And one thing we like to do, aside from trying to bring local reporters, as close as we can possibly get them to a completed, meaningful, impactful story, we also like to elevate your work to a national level. So in 2019, we were able to actually take 2 stories that local reporters had produced based on our resources and air them on Reveal. They comprise the bulk of this episode, Think Globally, Report Locally. So that was Kentucky CIR, who had done that great award-winning rape clearance investigation in Louisville. And also that Colorado KUNC investigation into high school concussions. Those were the 2 stories that we featured as part of this episode. Next slide, please. So to zoom way out for a second, one question I get from, not so much from reporters, but often from editors of those reporters is like, wait, why does Reveal do this? Like, why do you invest time in this? Why do you have a guy who's like half of his job is to just sort of promote this, this program, to like give resources away and, help train up local reporters to push Reveal stories farther in their communities? And there's 3 reasons basically, and they're all pretty simple. Number one is, we know it's not easy to be a local reporter. There are a lot of time and budget constraints. And so what we're always aiming to do is bring local reporters to, if you want to borrow a football analogy, bring them to the 2-yard line of a great investigative piece. Like I mentioned before, if there's a finding that we already have that's provable, that we can hand to you in a with a bow wrapped around it, that's a really compelling argument, not only for you to tell a great story, a potentially impactful story in your community, but also for you to bring to your editor and be like, look, they already did a lot of the hard part. Like, let's tell this story and then see what comes of it. See if we can produce more follow-up reporting to actually, make something change here. It's always true that the better the materials we have to offer you, the easier it is for you to turn around and get a great story. So we're cognizant of that, and we're always doing our best to kind of curate the material to make sure that it is the most compelling for you. And also, we have a broader goal of building investigative capacity among young journalists and local journalists. And this is just frankly a great jumpstart for that. If you're a reporter, a local reporter who's got daily, weekly deadlines all the time, and you really want to get into investigative work, but you're not sure how to break in, you need that little leg up. This is a great first step for you. The second reason, we're a nonprofit. Okay, so the way we raise money is by proving that our work is generating change, no matter how small the change is. And of course, we love to see laws changed and government inquiries launched and things like that. But it really also matters to us when an issue we've equipped local reporters to cover creates fierce debate at a town council meeting, or a local mayor weighs in on the issue. This is how we raise money, showing that that our reporting is having these reverberations across the country and is generating change, making the world a better place. And this is absolutely part of that. This is part of that strategy, and this is what we take to our funders to prove that to them. Just to be totally transparent with you. And then number 3, I'll be blunt here. Most people don't know who Reveal is. They don't know who we are. They don't know what we do. They might hear their community mentioned briefly in one of our episodes when they're driving and they flip past NPR or something. But it's a different question to see an issue that they care about reflected in their local paper or on their local public radio station. And so you folks as local reporters have unprecedented access, and you've garnered unprecedented trust that we just don't have with your local audiences. And so when you tell the story that we've only gestured at in a national radio show that they maybe haven't even heard, it hits differently for them than it would if it were just Reveal. So those are the 3 key reasons that we invest so much time and energy into these reporting networks, and why it's so important for us to kind of keep pushing them forward and keep recruiting folks like yourself to sign on and get started. And so on that note, how do you get started? Next slide, please. It's simple. First, you just head over to revealnews.org/network. You'll see all the different networks I talked about here. You'll also see a form at the bottom of the page that allows you to input your name, newsroom, a little bit about yourself, your email address, and you can tick off using a checkbox which network you're interested in joining. And then you'll just get a series of emails from me providing the resources, and you'll get a couple introduction emails to the networks. Now, I want to be very clear here. I don't spam. I'm not a spammer at all. I understand how important it is for you guys to maintain a clean inbox and to remain focused and stuff. So I've made it a rule with these networks that once we get the onboarding process out of the way, you're only going to hear from me, A, if you write to me with a question, B, when we have new resources coming up, when we're about to launch a new network and we have a bunch of new stuff we want to give you, and a training to set up, a webinar, or in some cases, when there's been a little flurry of stories that have come out of the networks, and I'm just putting them out there for all the reporters. There's about 1,100 reporters in networks now. When I'm putting them in front of all those folks just to give a little recognition to the folks who have produced stories and hopefully garner a share on social for those folks, because this is a community of people where we can support each other too and share each other's work. So you also have an opportunity to join our Slack channel. I'll be honest, our Slack channel is not like a thrumming hub of activity and tip sharing, but if you do want to reach me quickly, it is a good place for that. I'm responsive to email as well, but the Slack channel is useful for just getting in touch with me super fast. And then finally, and I'll say this again, this is free. This is completely free. There's no commitment to you. We don't have membership dues or anything like that. Our goal, the reason we go to all this trouble is sort of like what I elucidated before, those 3 key reasons. We raise money based on our ability to prove that our stories have an impact. We have it in our mission to promote investigative capacity at the local level. And again, your audience knows you better than they know us. And so you have that trust. And we think that our work and our work sort of complemented through your additional work would really hit home with them in a way that we just can't make that happen with the level of detail. So that's why we do it, and that's why it's free. Just a couple more slides. Next one. There are some expectations that we do have of folks when they sign up, and those come in the form of our partnership requirements. So first and foremost, you're responsible for the work you produce. Any story you produce based on our findings, tips, or data, you're responsible for the factual accuracy and et cetera, of all those things. We ask also that you follow SPJ's Code of Ethics. This is probably very similar to your own newsroom's Code of Ethics, so this isn't really much of an issue. In cases where we've given away tips, we just ask that you let the tipsters know you got the tips from us, because often they've sent us a tip, and then if somebody else reaches out to them, they've sent us a tip and also said to us that it's okay if we share it with local reporters. But nevertheless, it can be a little disconcerting for tipsters if somebody totally different than Reveal reaches out to them. Help us keep the tip cycle going. If there is a form, like a web form, where we're collecting people's stories and you're furthering that reporting, we ask that you share the form as well so we can keep the tips coming. We have a little bit of credit language. We ask you to credit Reveal. It's just like one little sentence at the very, very end of your story, just directing people back to the Reveal reporting networks in case anybody reading it is interested. And finally, just stay in touch. A lot of people turn these stories out, but it's on me to kind of keep up with what's new, what's landing. And I could always use it. I build things like Twitter lists and stuff to try to keep track, but it's always helpful if you just drop me the link whenever you've published one of our stories based on the findings we've shared with you, especially because I have this goal of trying to elevate the stories up to Reveal. So if you share the stuff with me, it'll be really good for me to kind of keep it archived in the event that we're going to produce another one of those shows that sort of leans heavily on local reporters, members of the network, to push the story further. And that is it. Just a little time for questions. More than a little. We got 20 minutes, and I'm happy about that because I'm sure there will be some questions, and it'll just be nice to chat a little bit more with all you folks. So I don't see anything in the chat, but do any of you have any questions you want to just pose to me right now? Just jump right in.
Well, I have a question. Or Darius, do you have a question? See you unmuted.
Oh, I thought I was unmuted. I was trying to mute myself.
Okay.
So I apologize.
Okay. Well,
Zoom
I actually
live.
have Zoom live. I have a question. So what would like a day look like for one of your reporters who is working with a new network? Like what, from like start to finish, kind of going into something, hey, this is Bard, you know, this is a new network. How
Sure.
do you,
Do you mean a reporter who's joined the networks, or do you mean me sort of working on building a network?
I'll say like a new network. So like you have the PPP, you know, network that's coming out. Like how do you like reach out, and how do you kind of like start that new network with your journalists?
Sure, yeah.
Reporters?
So it's definitely a process that begins early in the story process internally here at Reveal. You know, we have like a quick check-in when the reporters are developing a story to just see if there's a big data set that might be shareable. And if there is, we begin plotting, okay, we're going to build a network alongside this story as you're reporting, and we're going to try to share those resources out, develop those resources, and then share those resources out as soon as the story goes live, if not before. And so I take the bulk of that work, you know, touching base with the networks, trying to figure out a workflow for how we might share the resources, whatever form they take, whether it's tips or data sets or what have you. And then I tend to develop the trainings, and then I let the data journalists or whoever the lead reporters on the story are fill out the trainings with more detail. I invite reporters weeks ahead of time to the training. It's usually an hour-long webinar, kind of like this. We go through sort of the nitty-gritty of how to use our stuff. We answer questions, and then I'm sort of the point person as people take that stuff in their own communities and begin to push it forward. As for the question of like, if you're a local reporter and you get your hands on, you attend one of our trainings, you're like, okay, this subject matters in my community, I'm going to report it out. What a day in their life is like, I'm not sure, because you know these are folks that don't work for Reveal. You know, we're giving them these resources, but ultimately they work for their own newsroom. But from what I've heard from surveying our network members, it's always a negotiation with their editor to take on a longer project. There are always time constraints and budget constraints. Our goal, like I said before, is to make this as easy and tantalizing as possible for these folks to tell a great, impactful story. And often they're juggling a lot of stuff, and it takes a little longer than they would like. But you know, I think the results speak for themselves. You know, we're closing in on 100 of these stories produced from the local reporting networks just over the course of a couple of years since 2018. And so this model works. And the thing that I'm doing now is trying to, number one, diversify our networks, find communities such as yourself who are composed of interested journalists who might want access to this stuff, and then refine the method by which we share this stuff, so it's even easier on you as reporters to just take the stuff and run with it. And then again, the gains that we get from it are the, you know, what I explained before. You know, we'll want to see impact at the local level. Looks like Matthew has a question.
Hi, Bjorn. I just thank you for the presentation, by the way. I'm a little fuzzy on the process in terms of, I guess for me, I'm not working for an organization at the moment, but I am in touch with a few editors, and they've invited me to pitch stories. So doing some blue sky thinking, if I pitch the Boston Globe on a story and they like it, and they give me the green light on it, how do I approach, like, and I think it's something we could partner on. How do I do that? I guess I'm just a little fuzzy on that.
So you would be publishing that story for the Boston Globe.
Right.
You know, you would take what we gave you and you would pretend that we weren't even involved to a certain extent. You know, it would just be, I have this story, I have these provable facts, I have this data set, I happen to get it from Reveal. I think it would be a great Boston Globe story. Let's go, Boston Globe. And then at the end of the story, I think you would need to make it clear that like this was part of the Reveal Reporting Network. But again, all that's really on them is to have that little bit of crediting language.
Okay.
And I guess, and then follow whatever protocols they normally have for making sure that the work freelancers are doing is getting edited and fact checked in all the ways that it normally would.
Right. And just as a follow-up to that, thank you for that. But if I was interested in investigating, so a government agency, for example, or you know, labor practices, whatever it might be, and that might require a Freedom of Information Act request, sometimes these government agencies will charge you for that. Is that something that you'd be able to help me with, or is there a way around that?
Yeah, I think we could help guide you on that. I also think that the outlet that that you end up publishing with would be the first to go to with
Yep.
that, because they
Right.
often have an in-house counsel who is very well acquainted with how to do this and how to basically argue, no, I don't have to pay for this. That's bullshit, which is usually the argument you want to pursue.
Right.
It's usually bullshit when they're asking you to pay. But absolutely, we're available to help guide on
Right.
that too, if you run into roadblocks there.
Right, it's exciting.
Any other
Anyone else?
questions?
Because the network is so large, I was just curious. I live in Washington, D.C., right? And so, like, the journalists' capital of everything, there's journalists everywhere. So then I worry about, like, signing up and then, like, trying to work on a story. And then I go to, like, publish this. And it's like every other outlet here has published this piece, right? And so then I worry just a little bit about that kind of thing. I mean, and it's hard, right? Because I haven't seen the materials, I haven't seen the data.
Of course, yeah. I think that's a legitimate worry. I can also tell you it's never happened.
Okay.
And my theory for why it's never happened is that the nature of the stuff that we share is often such that this is a cross section of reporters from all over the place who cover. Sorry, I've become a vampire. Who cover a variety of different things, the variety of different beats. They may have joined because of the concussion one, because they cover education, and they're still logged on or they're still part of the network when we share the one about PPP loans. But they're like, that sounds cool, but I don't cover that. Alternately, they may have joined because there was a story opportunity where they lived in Alabama, but the next set of resources that come, there's nothing for Alabama because that's just, our data didn't really show anything compelling in Alabama. So there's a certain degree of sort of statistical noise in like how many people there are. I'm proud that there are 1,100 people there, but I absolutely believe that all 1,100 don't pay attention every time,
Right?
Or they do pay attention, but it's not going to be applicable to 1,100 reporters every time we come out with stuff. That said, could there theoretically be some competition between two DC reporters for a really solid DC scoop? If we had one to offer, yes. Have I seen that happen? No, not yet, not ever. The closest thing that has happened is 2 reporters reached out to me about a rehab tip. I connected them with each other. One happened to be a public radio reporter, one happened to be a text reporter, and they ended up collaborating and publishing both on the radio and on the website of the text reporter's newsroom. And it was like a collaboration that they handled on their own, and it was great. And there were 2 different iterations of the story. You're absolutely right that like if this network grew to like 10,000 people, that might become more of an issue. I like to promote collaboration. Maybe I'm a little pie in the sky because we're a nonprofit and others are, just in direct competition with each other. But I can honestly tell you, and I wouldn't bullshit you on this, like it hasn't really happened yet, even though there are 1,100 people in the networks. Another product of it may just be that so many people are busy and like, honestly, it's hard, even if there's really good stuff, it's hard to get a ton of reporters to do a ton of stories, We had, it's like this pipeline, like the PPP one that just launched, I think is maybe the strongest data set we've had yet. 70 reporters attended our training. I'd say about 45 or 50 have downloaded the data set so far. I'm not sure which localities they're all from. Granted, the network only launched a couple days ago, but there are only 5 stories that have come of it so far. And they had 2 weeks notice. They had 2 weeks to do this data. We gave them a jump start this time. I know more of them are working on it. It wasn't I can't impose deadlines on anybody. I'm not anybody's boss. But we did give them the 2-week advance notice and an embargo date in the hopes of sort of cultivating a little bit of urgency so that we all could publish together and all kind of bounce, cross promote and things like that. I think there will be more. I know there will be more stories, but like, that's actually a pretty standard sort of pipeline of like 70, 45, 5, hopefully 20, but like 5. So, if you're really motivated, the competition is not as brutal as you might think.
I mean, I suppose there's a lot to write about, right? I mean,
Yes.
Um,
Yeah. And again, there's people who have signed up for any
yeah.
number of different things. You know, maybe you signed up for the Amazon network because you're a labor reporter, and then if you're strictly a labor reporter, there really hasn't been a network for you since like the last Amazon iteration. But you're on the mailing list. I don't hassle you. I don't annoy you. So hopefully you're staying on, like in the hopes that there'll be something else good for you in the future.
I was just interested in hearing more about the whole high school concussion one. You said that that there was like a call out post on your social media channels for like the public to like take this form and submit it to their own schools. Is that right?
That's correct. Yeah, we did a text message activation on our podcast. I believe it was text football to 474747, and then we built a tool that automatically texted you back. I think it was actually technically a link to a web page on our site. You go to the web page and then you just hit a button and it downloads the form for you. But also on our social channels, we were touting the form, saying like, hey, we did this story about head injuries, but if you want to know in your community, your school district, what the policy is, do they even have a policy? Download this form. And that's how, and in our newsletter as well. And people circulated that a little bit. And that's how we got up to around 200 folks. Again, about 40 of whom were reporters.
So follow up on that one. I was interested. So how is Reveal using new types of media that are coming out? Since I'm a little bit more on the younger crowd, I try to keep up on like what's the biggest new social network rolling out, and I try to get on that as a young reporter to make sure I'm like in touch with people. So have you guys looked at newer websites, new social medias to kind of pick up scoops or tips?
Yeah, well, I think that we've done some reporting through Instagram. I think a lot of our reporters use these channels as places to find sources and to interact with sources. I once helped one reporter set up an Instagram account, period, so he could like direct message younger sources who he just wasn't finding on LinkedIn or whatever. As for like, how do we experiment with storytelling and putting our stories in front of proper communities on those platforms? I used to manage our social accounts. I don't do it anymore. I'm too old. But we have experimented with things in the past. I know for a fact we're not on TikTok or anything like that. But the things that work for us, for our audience, and for the means that we have, certainly our text message activations that happen in our podcast. So we'll have our host as part of the story read something out, like text such and such to 474747. If you want to get involved, if you want to tell us your story, if you've experienced something similar, we're continuing to report on this, blah blah blah. As direct appeals to the audience, that works really well, depending on the subject matter. Because the podcast audience is huge. It's like more than 1.5 million people every month. And then, like I said, the broadcast audience is huge too. It's 600 radio stations, public radio stations across the country. So we can really cast a wide net when we do that. And then, there are times where we do like individualized outreach to different communities based on the subject. Like I do some reporting on tech. And I find that when I'm looking for tips or perspectives on something, Reddit can be very helpful for me. Different communities, Facebook groups, things like that. But that's kind of a case-by-case thing. I don't know that we have like a unified strategy because every story is so different that we tell.
Cool, thank you.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Do you localize your investigations? I mean, I do local reporting, so I'm not sure if all of your investigations are like national or worldwide, but if I needed something New York specific, either like New York City or New York City area or Long Island or whatever, like the PPP thing is an interesting network. So, but I might not really care about the national. I might like mention it, but I might want to get into the specifics about New York City or Long Island or New Jersey or whatever.
That's exactly what these networks are for.
Okay.
That's all these networks are for. And the PPP one, in fact, I would go ahead and say, I know off the top of my head that the New York stuff is pretty bad. you're going
Right.
to want to join the PPP network and take a look at the data we have here, because New York was among the 24 or so metro areas where the disparities in PPP recipients was really severe between
how-
white recipients, or excuse me, recipients in white census tracts versus those in minority census tracts.
But how much do you actually drill down? I mean, could I go down and ask you like for like a particular borough, town, county?
Join the network and comb through the data.
Okay.
And if you have questions about it, let me know. But it's very specific. I believe it's by census tract.
Okay.
So yeah. So what we did was we were the first newsroom to overlay all PPP loan recipients on top of census tracts, and then of course census tracts provide information on the racial demography, and so we could see basically who got loans and what percentage of the population in those census tracts was Latinx or Black or white. And then the conclusions we drew were the majority of businesses in a lot of these metro areas, the businesses that got the majority of PPP loans were in white census tracts versus in minority census tracts. And again, New York was bad. So you're going to want to look at New York for sure.
Sorry for asking a dumb question. I just got introduced to this tonight, so.
No, of course.
But I signed up.
This is for. Great, yeah, and again, not to hard pitch you guys. I know we have a few minutes left, but it's no commitment to you. It's completely free. You'll get an email a month tops from me. Again, after the flurry of introductory emails, there are a lot of those, but move past those. And yeah, just keep an eye on it. Frankly, like that's all we really ask. And if there's stuff that's interesting to you, by all means, attend to training. Tell us about your work as it develops. Share the link to your story with us. And again, ideally, with the really powerful stories that the networks produce, we want to bring them back up to Reveal and feature them and give them a national audience. So it's sort of, we hope for it to be sort of a mutually beneficial arrangement in that way.
All right. Well, thank you, Byron, for presenting. Are there any other last minute questions, or I think we're good? All right.
Great. Okay. Well, so nice to meet all of you. Congrats to Matthew and Will on your graduations. And yeah, it was great. Please do stay in touch. Just email me if you need anything, if you have any questions. And yeah, Amber, I'll let you wrap things.
All right. I'll send out his email address, if that's okay, Byron. And then I guess the contact for the Slack or how to get involved with that. So we'll get that all sent out to y'all. But thank you very much for presenting, and we hope you all have a great night.
Thank you.
Thanks, Byron.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right. Thank
Appreciate
you guys.
it.
Take care.
Bye.
Appreciate it.